July actually started his own comic label called Rippawatch, which, first off, you don't name your publisher your comic universe. Marvel Comics is not, their comic publisher name is not the Marvelverse. Their publisher is Marvel Comics. He
Right, that would
with Rippa Comics, but he went with Rippaverse as his comic publisher name, and it's his hip hop name.
Just the whole idea of ANCAP rap. I mean, it makes Tim Pool sound good by comparison.
Yeah. It's almost like if Tim Pool were to make, like, I don't know, something really dumb like Timcast Records. I say that because that's a real thing that he's actually made. You can listen to his first hit single now that definitely isn't about the January 6th defendants. Don't make any connections to that. It's just a song called Will of the People, and he's just, you know, it's just a coincidence.
Hey there folks, it's Spooky from the future here. In the interest of journalistic integrity here, I should mention that Timcast Music is the name of the YouTube channel where Tim Pool uploads his music, but he is currently releasing music under the new title, Trash House Records. What the fuck? You said it, man.
Thing is like, it is, you know, like we said before, it is, you know, not just bad on, it's not bad on principle, obviously, that individual, you know, sort of commentators or whatnot are making their own content that is different, right? It's like branching out, making your own stuff. I think the Rippaverse trailer itself is probably, and this is someone, again, I admit this, at least once every stream, I used to, at least since we started this segment, I used to be a viewer of Eric July, not a huge fan or anything, but when I was in my right sort of libertarian phase, near the end of it, his stuff did come up every now and again, and to his credit, he used to at least, I haven't checked, he does talk about police brutality in his music and how that's a bad thing.
He also criticizes BLM in the same song.
That's the game you play when you look into Eric July. You have to acknowledge the fact that while he does have some moments where it's like really cool stuff going on, the rest is him ranting about the cathedral on Twitter and saying Hoppa memes, and it's like,
he calls SJWs in the woke crowd like fake comics fans who only show up like when, you know, when they want to support projects for their political reasoning. He's like, they're not the weekly Wednesday warriors. He's like, they may work at the comic shop, but they're not the people with, you know, pool folders and shit like that. They're coming in there once a week to collect their new comic. And I'm like, I mean, I am. And so are some of my friends. Like, I am very much a weekly Wednesday warrior. I've been a few weeks off because I've been broke, but, like, I've got my comics saved up. Like, there's a lot of us who just, for the same reason that he's saying that he no longer reads mainstream comics and just not feeling like they're actually speaking to him and that they're not listening to their fucking fan base. In many ways, they're not. They've always been bad at that to varying degrees. They're an out-of-touch capitalist fucking company working hierarchically. Like, Eric doesn't collect comics to that extent anymore, but he's on his YouTube page, you know, criticizing SJWs for not being there every Wednesday collecting comics and only collecting comics when, like, it fits their political view. But to an extent, that's exactly what he and his side are doing, too. And it's so weird because he's like, oh, they only support it when it's their political views. No. I mean, I'm reading I love me some old Frank Miller. Currently, I'm collecting all the new Spawn universe shit. Like King Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn and Scorched. None of this shit is, you know, necessarily SJW shit. That was all the hyper-masculine stuff from the 90s that's just goofy as hell in how over-the-top masculine it is. There's nothing SJW about that. Like, sure, they're not afraid of queer people, but, like, you know, that's a fucking low bar, and it's just, there is a lot of tokenization in the representation that mainstream companies throw out at times. And you do have that checklist mentality of, oh, a new character, how are they going to be diverse? You know, and in a way that's just a corporate decision and not authentic, like, diversity and creators writing characters they're passionate about. That's where you get shit like Marvel debuting Snowflake and Safe Space as New Mutants. And they were terrible characters that were immediately critiqued and just torn apart by the queer community on so many fucking levels. It was just weird token representation that felt corporate. It felt like it was a corporate checklist and not authentic shit. It's hard to figure out what's the good, authentic comics when you're trying to read it. Like when I'm reading the Miles Morales What If comics, and all of a sudden it takes a left turn with the What If Thor comic where it's just wildly racist for no reason. And, you know, you never know what you're doing when you're collecting that shit. You're just hoping. But there's a reason why people only collect comics sometimes when they hear it's going to be good representation, because they're tired of dealing with shitty representation. So yeah, Eric July, not everyone fucking goes to the comic shop every week because they don't feel represented by comics the same way you don't, you fuck.
Also, some of us are actually worried about the whole pandemic thing and, you know, mass disabling events and all that stuff that he's been skeptical of, to put it politely. I do think that it's interesting how, again, there is that grain of, you know, making authentic representation, because the safe space thing did seem to me like it was one of those examples from like the H-Bomber guy Woke Brands video. A lot of companies will do these signaling things because right-wingers get very, very upset. That drives up engagement, drives up stock value, and again, that's another problem with, you know, not just corporatism, but it's almost like they're the same thing. Capitalism and corporatism, one leads into the other. He's almost getting there. He's very close, but then hard right at like the worst possible moment.
Play the Rippawatch trailer because it's interesting, because I don't know if he talks about it in this video, but he does talk about some of the workers' rights issues when he's talking about the issues of the mainstream industry. And he does talk about like some of the other issues of the mainstream comic industry that are real. But then he also just adds in a whole bunch of non-woke shit. Now, not anti-woke. He just
right.
uses the term non-woke.
Let's hear it from the man himself.
I'm Eric July, founder, owner, and writer. Welcome to the Rippawatch.
I like the disclaimer that, you know, the cultural or ethnic background is completely
it's
irrelevant.
not him assuring us that he's not racist. It's him saying that he doesn't give a fuck about identity politics.
Well, I mean, it's pretending that the work of art is just something completely hermetically sealed from the surrounding culture and doesn't reflect any cultural values from the background culture or bring something different to people, you know, depending on how they relate to it, you know, given their own backgrounds. It's just the idea that there's some kind of a generic art that's above anything so-called political, quote unquote.
Well, it's funny because he's saying this at the same time that, from my understanding of some of the stuff that I read from the descriptions of the Isom comic, he's writing black characters and pulling from his background in, like, gang culture and stuff like that, and growing up, like, in those areas. And it's just like, okay, so is he not drawing from a certain, like, black experience and giving voice to that? And he's even said that to a certain extent as a fucking way to one-up his detractors of like, oh, you SJWs all the time, like, you know, talk about wanting this type of representation, and now you're attacking one of the biggest black-owned, like, independent comic publishers and calling us Nazis because they're openly involved, they're openly buddying up to Comicsgate shit. Eric July now works for Blaze TV, Rush Limbaugh's fucking company.
I thought that was Glenn Beck's.
Oh yeah, Glenn Beck's company. And he also, like, he's part of the whole Mises Caucus crowd in the LP. So, like, yeah, he's got terrible politics, and he's queer-phobic as all fuck.
And anti-immigrant, right? Or am I wrong about that?
I'm pretty damn sure.
Up to the point that it influences his band's ability to tour in, like, Canada. That's a real story, by the way. That was a very funny article. What he's saying is not so much that comics are detached, or that media is already detached from politics, but more that it shouldn't be. And this is sort of the marketing thing of him basically saying, oh, here's an example of that. And I think that, broadly, I do agree, right? This media is political, just in, whatever way it, if it's commenting on stuff and coming from a genuine place, that's going to seep into it. And, I think that's sort of the one nuance I would add there. Otherwise, yeah, pretty much that's been his pitch for years. One thing that he brought up that I think is a salient point is the thing of physical copies just themselves. Like, Logan and I have talked about how it's good to have, like, discs of stuff. You can't have a corporation come in and delete all of that stuff from your house, right?
Warner Brothers isn't, just took a bunch of shit off, and half of that stuff that was streaming original isn't on physical media. Like, it never got a physical release. Streaming has really screwed up our ability to archive shit outside of piracy, and they give us no choice. And it's almost as if they are encouraging it, especially with how much they're pushing it.
Same thing with the proliferation of streaming services. It's like everything used to be, either on Netflix or Hulu just about, and now they've got all of these separate in-house streaming services so that, just to watch the major new movies that are coming out, you might have to subscribe to half a dozen different streaming services.
Oh, I hop between them depending on what I want to watch at the time because I'm broke. And I share a lot of the passwords because I can't afford everything.
Yeah, they're creating every incentive in the world to go back to large-scale piracy. It's like, back in the day, iTunes and Netflix, because they had fairly reasonable pricing, did away with a lot of piracy just because they were cheap enough that it really wasn't worthwhile to go to all the extra trouble unless, somebody was extremely money poor and time rich. But now they're making piracy worthwhile again, and they're so fucking stupid they don't seem to understand, absolute basic minimum of what their business, the effect their business model has and how self-destructive it is.
I'm not sure if it's that they're stupid. It might be that there's enough competitiveness in our system that you can have new entrants, and the benefit of starting your own streaming platform is privately held, whereas the costs to your overall class in the sense of these large content companies, in the sense of people being deterred by transaction costs of switching between and maintaining multiple streaming services, being deterred from going that legal route and incentivized towards undermining intellectual property monopolies by routing around them through the heroic means of digital piracy. I mean, that's costly for these content companies, but those costs are dispersed across all the content companies. And so because of the concentrated benefits and dispersed costs, as long as there's a multiplicity of firms, even a relatively small multiplicity, and they can't find a way to cartelize among themselves, to engage in collective action amongst themselves, then we're going to see this dynamic arise, right? It's similar to sort of a Marxist story about competitive processes among capitalists sowing the seeds of capitalism's destruction. We heighten the contradictions, comrades.
forget. Gabe El-Taib. He's the one who was working on Superman, Son of Kal-El, up until Superman's son came out as bi. And then he got all huffy about it. And he didn't quit then. He quit when Superman's motto was changed from truth, justice, and the American way to truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Way fucking cooler. But he got all pissy about that. I forget whether he wrote a letter or confronted Jim Lee or whatever and told him that he should feel more thankful to America for giving everything to him and his immigrant family that he has and all this shit. Which Gabe is also an immigrant, so he's just like, we have all we have because of America, and like,
And
all
so
this
is
shit.
Superman.
And then
Yeah.
he broke off and created his own indie comic starring 3 superheroes called Truth, Justice, and American Way. The whole story was that they were superheroes doing their best, but then the fake news started spearing them and revealing some of their flaws at the same time. So, not exactly smearing.
Yeah.
Honestly, it sounds like a story that before this got political and became a politically charged objection to the press was probably better told in Spider-Man with J. Jonah Jameson trying to get me pictures of Spider-Man! Get me pictures of truth, justice, and the American way!
What does it even mean to say America gives you something as opposed to, actual people that give you something? It's weird to believe in some entity called America that you're supposed to be grateful to when you don't even believe the majority of the actual people living within the borders of America are good Americans. It's like Sarah Palin talking about the pro-American parts of America. But is it just some, mystical entity? I don't think there's another country in the world that ordinary citizens place so much importance on their identity as
even nationalist movements in other countries, aside from some of the more explicitly, Nazi-ass leaning ones. Like, even while there's many reasons to be weary of them, a lot of them come from national liberationist movements. It's not really about this, same type of hyper-patriotism that we have in our country.
The whole concept of an American way is just such an American thing because, other than a few other cases like the Brits talking about something being un-British or whatever, it's just very rare. And even elsewhere in the Anglosphere, you don't see ordinary people just constantly flying the Union Jack or the Maple Leaf out over their front porch day in and day out like you do here. Right. It's just an almost pathological level of identification with nationality that you just don't see in normal countries.
The best case for any sort of American identity being so core in this way would be an identification with the ostensible classical liberal principles associated with the American founding, so a love of free expression or separation of powers or something. But in practice, this winds up being used as a justification to undermine those, right? I love America so much that I'll ban flag burning, despite that violating the First Amendment. I love America so much that I'll erect a border wall and grant the Border Patrol the power to violate the Fourth Amendment anywhere within 100 miles of the U.S. border, thereby rendering, for many people, the Fourth Amendment effectively null and void. I love America, therefore I'll support a military-industrial complex that results in consolidation of power, undermining of the distinction between local and federal level law enforcement, and move towards ever greater centralization and central government power, right? So even the best case for a sort of American way, a notion of some valorization of a particular set of constitutional civil liberties, in practice winds up, in the way many people conceptualize this patriotism or nationalism, being undermined by that very same patriotism or nationalism.
And it just, the term American way, Americanism, and all the rest of it are just culturally very dated, so that they sound a little bit quaint, like some kind of a line from some 80-year-old guy at the American Legion outpost. It has a very 1950s, Buffalo Bob says, obey your parents and attend a church of your choice type of vibe to it. And again, it's something that's not identified with any actual majority ethos. It's more like, we white heterosexual Christians are becoming a minority in our own country, and we've got to take it back from the majority of people who actually live here.
As we were saying with national liberation, that's kind of also, again, taking it back to our Rippawatch official branded segment, not copyrighted, is basically that he is, influenced by Malcolm X. Now, he does seem to have this weird theory that Malcolm X is a closet libertarian capitalist person because of one quote, and I have checked. It is one quote.
Claiming him as capitalist or communist is very hard to do because there's very minimal evidence for... He has that one quote that could be, seen as him being a capitalist, and then, there was, I think, when he got arrested one time, or something, there's records of him identifying as a communist. But, he didn't really talk about economics, honestly, other than, the need for black folks to build their own economic power. But he didn't actually focus on economics, and from what I can tell, he didn't really have set fleshed out economic views in that way. But what did y'all think of the Rippawatch trailer? The ISOM trailer.
I kept thinking that blonde woman was Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh, no.
Maybe cameo near future, it could happen. He's, if the customer wants it.
But only if the customer wants it.
Right.
It won't happen because of Eric's politics. No, sir.
I mean, her superhero origin could be someone, interviewing her and just pushing her last button until she completely melts down and kicks them or something.
Oh, I thought the origin was going to be space lasers.
Yeah.